I've made a big mess out of things, and I need you to go back and help clean things up. But tell my family I'm in a good place. 20 minutes has gone by. I'm still dead. In my second near-death experience, to know the answer to any question, all I had to do was think about it. And standing there in the middle of nowhere, I began to hear, this is the foundation for everything. My power is omnipotent. I am the creator of all. This is your real identity. I saw and became part of this gigantic web of twinkling lights woven together, and it just seemed to stretch into infinity. Inside each nucleus, there was a quark of light. Each quark of light represented a life. Light is what God uses to create, heal, and transform us. We're all connected. My beautiful daughter came out of nowhere, and there she was, perfect and whole. And I said, just tell me what it is that we can do for you. And she said 3 words that transformed my life. She said,
recently I booked a transformative energy healing session with Jamie from Refractive Healing. Through her divine energy healing, I found myself rejuvenated, reconnecting with my inner purpose and the universal energy that guides me. Jamie is a truly gifted healer. She seemed to intuitively grasp the challenges weighing on my soul and guided me towards a lighter, more enlightened path. I'm eager to share the secret gift with you, so please embrace this opportunity for healing by visiting the link below to book your complimentary energy healing session with Jamie. Let the journey of rediscovery begin. And now on to today's guest.
my heart attack was completely unexpected. So I've always taken care of myself. I've always been a guy that exercised and ate well and all of these things. And this happened in 2016. I had these bone spurs on my neck from sports injuries when I was younger. So I found a doctor in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, a very famous Korean surgeon who goes in through the front of the neck. It's called a foraminal anatomy, instead of cutting the back of your neck open. And then, of course, you're never right again. They have to fuse your discs. So he goes in and he moves the esophagus aside and he drills out the bone spurs. And it's a relatively simple procedure. People come from all over the world to get it done. And you stay in the hospital one night and then they send you home. And that's what I did. But in my case, when I got back to North Carolina, where I live, 4 nights later in my bed, I had a massive heart attack. But what's curious about this is that out of nowhere, it is about 11, 12 o'clock at night, I just started screaming in pain and thrashing around in the bed. And my wife thought that it might be my special needs daughter, Maria, having a seizure. So she runs down the hall and Maria's sleeping and comes back into the bedroom and turns on the light, and it's me. And I'm flopping around in the bed, screaming. And I told her I'd never felt a pain like this in my life. And as soon as I said that, I passed out. She called the ambulance. And thankfully, the hospital was only like 3 miles from our house. They got there quickly. They knew I was having a heart attack. They just didn't know how bad it was. So they get me into the hospital and into the emergency room. And they give me some blood thinners, some medicine to calm me down until they could figure out what's going on. Meantime, I'm unconscious the entire time. So they put me in a room with a nurse and my wife, because the cardiologist was not in the hospital because it was late at night. And the nurse tells my wife, he looks like he's stable right now. He should be fine until the cardiologist gets here. And as soon as the nurse said that, my wife said, I sprung up on the gurney like somebody had grabbed me by my shirt and just pulled me forward with great force, and my eyes sprung wide open, and I screamed out the name Frosty. And when I screamed out the name Frosty, I just fell backwards, collapsed on the gurney, and flatlined, died. Code blue, which is the code here in the US for when someone dies, rang out throughout the hospital, and in rushed a team of doctors to start working on me. And what's curious is that the lead doctor that night, a beautiful little Indian woman by the name of Dr. Patel, who's now a very good friend of mine, she was the one that rushed in first. Before my wife was taken out of the room, my wife turned to Dr. Patel and said, we have a special needs child and she will not make it without my husband, and I cannot do this alone. You have to save my husband's life. Talk about pressure. So they took my wife out of the room, and Dr. Patel began to work on me. What happened is that she could not get me revived. So she did, my medical records show that she did everything from vigorous sternal rubs to, I can't tell you how many times she shocked me with the paddles. That didn't work. They started to inject me directly in the heart with a long needle with epinephrine to try to restart the heart. 15 minutes went by and I was still flatlined dead. At that time, another doctor, the cardiologist, Dr. Bajwa, finally arrived on the scene. He did an emergency catheterization through my leg and fished a camera up through my leg into my heart. He found the blockage, which was in my widowmaker, the left side of the heart pump, and he inserted 2 stents. By now, 20 minutes has gone by. I'm still dead. But blood started to flow with the stents and started in my heart. But it was too late. I was in cardiogenic shock and respiratory failure. So another doctor came in and intubated me, which is when they put the tubes down your throat. And I would lay in a 4-day coma. So that's how it all started. And while I was in that 4-day coma, I was raised in the Catholic faith. And my oldest brother called a Catholic priest. The priest came in and gave me my last rites. I was anointed with oil and ashes. And also neurologists were coming in during that 4-day period to see if I were brain dead. I don't know how they test for that. But anyway, on the 4th day, they told my wife that they could not wait any longer and they were going to take the tubes out. They thought I was probably a vegetable. So they began to take the tubes out, and lo and behold, I began coughing and choking, and I was still alive. But my heart was completely destroyed. So what's curious about this first experience is that 2 things happened to me. My wife was the first one to enter the room when I was out of coma and I was able to breathe on my own. And she said that I was talking in this really high-pitched voice like a child. And I kept on saying to her, you have to believe me, you have to believe me. It was Frosty, it was your brother Frosty who came to me. That's the name I screamed out before I died. And to give you the backstory, my brother-in-law Frosty, who at the time was my age, 56, and Frosty unfortunately had taken his own life 7 weeks before I died, right before Christmas time. What's curious about this is that Frosty was going through a divorce and he had a drug addiction, but he had been clean for like 5 years. But there was a lot of pressure. He owned his own business. He was a land surveyor. He had 1 daughter in college, all the pressure of bills and the holidays. So he went out one night to blow off some steam, and he got a hold of a street drug that made him go crazy for like 45 minutes. And he was living in the upstairs bedroom of his parents' house at the time, separated from his wife. And so at about 5:30 in the morning, his mother called me and said, can you please come down to the house and go up into the bedroom and see if you can find a note or a notebook or some kind of clue as to why Frosty took his own life. I had thought about this many, many times over the years since this happened. I went up into that room 7 times, picking through a very, very gruesome scene. And I finally did find a journal and gave it to the family. Back to the emergency room when my wife came in, when I came out of coma, and I was telling her that, it was Frosty that came to me. And my wife said, tell me exactly what Frosty said to you. And Frosty said to me, I've made a big mess out of things, and I need you to go back and help clean things up. But tell my family I'm in a good place. Now, this was my first experience with any kind of spiritual and near-death experience. And what was curious about Frosty telling me that, 2 things, is that number one, I was raised Catholic. And at the time when I was a child, and I know they've changed the rules now, but when I was a child, if someone would have taken their own life, that was what was called a mortal sin, which means you were condemned to hell. And Frosty told me he was in a good place. And that opened up my mind, and that was a huge paradigm shift in my belief system, because there I was, and I never really bought into that whole religious dogma that if somebody would take their own life, that they would go to hell. Because I thought, how can a loving God commit anybody to hell who is confused or on drugs, or they've got mental problems, or all of these things that happen to us in life. So that kind of sealed that for me forever, that was a man-made law, and it was not something that came from a loving creator. And the second thing that experience with Frosty did for me was that it opened the door to my second near-death experience when I almost died again, when I went to Chicago awaiting my heart transplant. So when I came out of coma, my heart was completely destroyed. And they told me the only way that I was going to survive was to get a heart transplant. So in my book, that chapter is entitled Seeking a New Heart. You know, what's interesting about this is that to survive, they put a defibrillator vest on me, which was a portable shocking device. So every time my heart would go out, it would shock me back to life. Talk about PTSD. And then they put a port in my chest where every 30 seconds they was dripping this medicine called milrinone onto my heart, which my doctor said, you know, think of it as like STP here in the United States. It's like an additive that you put in your car that helps your car run better, but it wears out the heart very, very quickly. So the clock was ticking to find a heart. So that's how my whole journey started.
Such a beautiful story. Really a lot that we can take from that. And I also want to talk about the whole process of getting a new heart, because between your first heart attack and then getting a new heart and making it through, you've had to gone through a lot of things, which weren't at all easy for you because you were going through them, but it also wasn't easy for your wife and of course for your daughter. So tell us a bit about how you made it through until the transplant.
There was a walk of faith that I had to take there because there was no hope for a long time. Here in North Carolina, there are two very good heart transplant clinics. I went to both of them. Both of them told me that hearts are in very short supply and that there were too many people on the waiting list before me, and they doubted very much that I could get a heart. I went to both of those clinics. They both offered me very, very terrible alternatives, where one thing is called the LVAD, where they actually drill a hole in your heart and they put a motor in there and it just spins your blood. And I read about the LVAD, and less than 30% of people that ever get the LVAD live long enough to get a heart, because you have strokes and infections, and it's just a terrible, terrible, terrible device. There were other things offered to me that I just knew instinctively that if I went down that path, I would not live. So I made the decision that I would just rather die naturally instead of having to choose one of those things. So I died on January 26, 2016. And for the next couple of months, I went to these transplant centers and I had to do various testing and I had to do a lot of different things. My cardiologist, Dr. Bajwa, was keeping me alive with the milrinone dripping on my heart, the defibrillator vest, a lot of medications, but I was pretty much a zombie. And I was getting skinnier and skinnier and skinnier. And I was about to resign from my job when I called my boss and told him about my situation. And lo and behold, it's kind of like a Hollywood story. The owner of the steel company that I worked for at the time happens to be a philanthropist, which heart disease ran in his family. So he was donating a lot of money to a hospital in Chicago. And he made a phone call on my behalf and told him about my situation. And I got a call from a doctor in Chicago, and he told me that if I came to Chicago, that they would transplant me within 3 to 4 months if they didn't find anything else in my body that would prevent me from transplant. So when you're considered for a heart transplant, there are certain diseases, certain conditions like cancer, things like that will disqualify you from getting a heart, because hearts are in such short supply that they cannot afford to waste a heart. So when I got to Chicago, I'll never forget, I walked through the door and Dr. Ethereal at the time, who was the head of the heart failure department, looked at me and he said, "I have no idea how you're even walking around." But he said, we're gonna try to help you. And so fascinating, because my heart surgeon, an Indian man, Dr. Juvanandan, was working on an experimental heart pump for like 15 years. And he approached me one day and he said, "Look, Rob, there's no way that you're gonna live until a donor heart comes available, because we don't know when that's going to be. So he said, I've been working on this transplant bridge pump that hopefully will help you survive until a heart comes. And he said, it's called this new pulse. And I said, that's really cool. I said, how does this thing work? And he said, well, we'll fish this balloon pump down through your heart and out the left side of your body. We're going to put this titanium disc under your rib cage, and these wires will come out attached to this pump. It's about the size of a lunchbox, run by an iPad. And he said, this thing will pump your heart, and you can walk around with it and in theory, keep you alive until a donor heart comes. And I said, wow, that's really cool, Doc. I said, how many people have had this thing? And he said, well, that's just it. We've only experimented on cows and pigs. But he said, we just need 3 weeks of data in a human being to take this thing to the FDA here in the US in order to get it approved for human trials. And he said, I just don't think you have a choice, because you're not going to live unless we try this thing on you. So, Sabrina, I signed all the paperwork and I went through the operation. It was a success, and it was the best decision that I made in my life, because it did help me almost survive until the end, before my donor heart arrived. But this new pulse now is being used all over the country as a bridge to transplant, and it's being installed in people. And unlike me, who had to live in the hospital, they can go home with this device and wait until hopefully a donor heart will arrive. I was admitted into the University of Chicago on April 20th, which ironically is the day my father passed away when I was 5 years old. And that was his way of telling me that he was still with me. And then I didn't get my heart until June 6th of 2016. So died in January, got my heart in June. And that 6-month period was a real struggle, a walk of faith. I talk about the pastor who became a friend of mine, the Rev, in the book, who really helped me understand how adversity, and I know we'll talk about that later, could be a gift, and how it helps you develop a closer relationship with God if you'll let it, and if you put it in the right perspective. So there was a tremendous amount of ups and downs, and giving up and getting back up, and all of those things through that 6-month process.
Yeah, that's what I think not many people realize, that it's not point A and point B, you're out of the woods. It's just a constant up and constant down and roller coaster. And
Yep.
Some days your health was severely affected. So I can imagine there were many days where you just felt like giving up. You felt like, why am I doing this?
Many times. And isn't that life, though, in general? I mean, that's how if we're going to be honest with ourselves, that's how we live our lives. I mean, we feel really good when things are going well. And then when things are going bad, it's like, oh, why has God abandoned me? And what am I on this earth for? And why am I living? And all of those things. And that's what the lessons are that I talk about in this book, that are so important for all of us to learn and all of us to understand. And there's so much to unpack in the book, as you know. We can touch on some of those lessons, but and I'll let you, because there are some wonderful questions that you've asked me here that we can dig into before we get into that second near-death experience, if you want to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. So because you mentioned the Rev, one of the conversations that you've had with your friend was about giving up control and the need to surrender to faith and to the will of God. And the question that you had at the time was, how can I give up control when I don't know what the outcome will be? How can I put myself in a situation to give up control and let God take over? And I think it's such a pertinent question that you asked, that many of us have, because many people struggle with wanting to always be in the driver's seat of their life. And often enough, we don't think about destiny, about a greater plan. We just think about what we want and how we can get there. Mm-hmm. So tell us a bit about how you made peace with giving up control and letting God take over.
Great question. And I'm going to give you an example, too, that I think really succinctly defines this once and for all. Because here's what I've learned through my experience. The only thing we can really control in our life is our own actions. But ultimately, God controls the outcome. And let me say this, being the father of a special needs child, I've taken my daughter all over the world. I've gone down this path of, energy healers, mystics, people that said they can heal her, all of these things. You can create your own life, you can meditate and create, become a millionaire and all this silliness, right? It's all garbage. It's all garbage. Nobody can create anything. Let me tell you, if you come upon a guru who says that you can meditate and a bowl of chocolate ice cream in front of you, please tell me who that is, because I want to take my daughter to that person. It doesn't exist. We are co-creators. Okay, God did create us in his image, or whatever someone's belief system is. But I think the first thing we have to understand is we're spiritual beings first. We all come from the same place. You can call it divine intelligence, you can call it God, you can call it creator, you can call it whatever you want. But we all come from this place of love and light that is the creator. And when we understand that, it's easier for us to let go and let God. But that doesn't mean that we're not responsible for our own actions. That doesn't mean that we're not responsible for what we do every day. For example, if we want to get healthy and we're overweight and we want to lose weight, we're not going to pray ourselves there. We also have to do the work. We have to eat well. We have to exercise. We have to take responsibility. Okay. And then that's when the magic starts to appear. That's what I have found out in my life. But let me just give you a really succinct example of letting go and letting God, and why I believe the way I do so strongly. So after I died that night, and then went through this whole process of going through heart transplant and all of this stuff. So when I came back to North Carolina a year later, and by the way, when you get a heart, you have to live near the hospital for 1 year, because the hospital is responsible for you. And in that first year period, there's a very high chance of the heart rejecting or getting infected. So you have to go through weekly testing and all kind of things that we don't have time to get into, but you have to live near the hospital. So I had to get an apartment near the hospital in Chicago and live away from my wife and daughter for that year after transplant. So when I returned back to North Carolina and decided that I wanted to write my book, I went to interview the 3 doctors that saved my life that night. And the first doctor that I went to interview was Dr. Bajwa. And Dr. Bajwa was the cardiologist. He's a Sikh. And I'll never forget, I was sitting in the waiting room to see him, and the nurse called me back, and she said, Dr. Bajwa will be right with you. And when Dr. Bajwa walked in the room, I stood up and I immediately burst into tears. And I said, Dr. Bajwa, I just wanted to come back because I never had the opportunity to thank you for saving my life. And as soon as I said that, he said to me, I didn't save your life. God saved your life, because it's impossible for you to be here. He said, I did everything I could as a physician, but it was God that saved your life, because you're not done yet. There's more to your life. There's a purpose that you have to live out. And purpose is the key. You see, we are spiritual beings that come here to clearly define, figure out, and live out our purpose. That's where the joy of living comes from. And this is where I learned that the Creator, God, both experiences and expresses life through us when we live our purpose. So this is where we have to understand, when we get down and we're going through daily life like I did, died almost twice, died once and almost died the second time. And I have a special needs child. She's 27 now. I watch her suffer every day. It's a very difficult thing to understand in this physical temporal realm, but we have to understand that this is not the end, and that our spiritual life is the most important thing, and that all things happen in spirit first. So we have to learn how to connect with that. And this is where we evolve as people and learn to live more in faith and let go, because there is a plan for our life. I could promise you. Listen, I had to die at 56 years old to figure this out. That's not how I spent the first 56 years of my life. But then after this experience, these are the things that I learned, and these are the things that I came back with the hard way and continue to live through some of these struggles. But now I have a knowing. When you know the truth, there's no going back. And I know the truth that there's a God, there's a plan. We have to trust in it, but we have to do the work here and do the best we can to find and live out our purpose and not waste our life. That's the long way of answering your question, but I hope it helps.
It's also the beautiful way of answering it. Really beautiful answer. And I think it does a great job at explaining why we just need to have faith, even though when we're going through the challenges, it almost never makes sense and you can't understand the end point. You don't know why you're going through what you're going through.
Exactly. Like I said, I had to die to figure these things out. But now in retrospect, I understand why I had to go through all of them. And of course, there's a lot more to the story, and what I found out about my daughter and us as human beings and all of these things. So, yeah.
And before we get into that, because I know that in your second near-death experience, you had a beautiful moment with your daughter. But before we talk about that, and we talk also about why you had to go through all of these challenges, tell me a bit about your take on adversity. So why does God challenge us, right? If we have an all-loving God, if everything is laid out, why can't we just live blissfully in a world where there's no pain, no challenges, no nothing? Sort of like heaven.
Well, that's easy. That's because if we lived in this blissful, beautiful world where we're never challenged and we never learn anything and everything is just lovely and it's all about love and sunshine and happiness, we will never evolve or learn anything. I have this saying that everybody looks at me kind of odd when I say to people that we never really learn anything when we're on vacation. It's through the vicissitudes of life. It's through the struggle where we find meaning. It's kind of like, I remember reading about how Albert Einstein, he pushed himself as a scientist to figure out how to split the atom so the world would never go through something like the Holocaust again. He didn't like the way the bomb was used, but he had to figure something out so the world would never see the horrors of something like that again. It's only when we're pushed into the corner, when there's nowhere else to run, that we really get to the core of our authentic selves. And that's where we become everything that we're created to be. It's a process, but that's where we find purpose. That's where we find the true beauty behind what we are, behind this flesh and blood, which is spirit, which is we're spiritual beings being allowed to express the kindness and love of God in this physical realm, how we are now. But we can't get there when we cover ourselves up with addictions, with bad behavior, with all of these things that we, too much social media, wasting our lives, coming down on ourselves, complaining about everything, not being grateful. That gets us nowhere. So, it would be nice to say, well, why don't we live in this blissful world where children like my daughter Maria don't get sick and there are no wars and there are none of these things that are going on. And of course, everybody wants that. But when you flip it on its head and you really look at what that means for us as a human race, you'll come to understand that. And you see this sometimes amongst the wealthy, and particularly the second generation of children, when they're given too much money and they're given everything, they waste their lives, don't they? They don't become anything. They just drift along. They know they have plenty of money. They never really uncover what it is, the gifts that they were given to express while they're here. And I can't say that enough. What I learned is that we come here with a gift. Every single one of us comes here with a gift and a purpose that needs to be expressed, because the Creator cannot express and cannot created us to manifest all the things that we want to become, but we have to do it. We have to do the work. So as we peel this onion back through the vicissitudes and hardships and the reality of life, if we really work hard to find out who we are, and that's what happened to me. When my daughter got sick, I blamed God. I blamed I wasn't making enough money in my job. I blamed my company. Blamed my wife for not being more supportive in this, that, or the other. Blamed the whole world. Got angry. Started drinking too much. All of this mess that I created around my daughter getting sick, blaming her for getting sick, and why did this have to happen to me, and all of these things. But if it hadn't happened, and I hadn't had this heart attack and died, who knows what I would have become. So now I consider myself as a person who continues to evolve spiritually, to try to do the work, to try to spread love and kindness and empathy in the world, and understand that we're all connected. We're all connected. And when people like you and I put ourselves out there to share these kind of stories, it raises everybody up. That's my take on adversity.
And I think it's sometimes something that we need to hear, because often enough, and you mentioned it before, right? We go through life and think, well, if she hadn't done that, if he didn't do that, then I'd be okay. I mean, I would be so calm. I would be wonderful. I'd be fantastic. If only that person hadn't done this or that, my life would have been wonderful.
Yep.
And we need to shift out of that mindset. And I always say it's easier on some days than it is on others. And again, you have to give yourself grace and forgive yourself for that, because that's also human nature.
That's right. When I think about some of the decisions I made when I was 20 years old versus, the decisions I would make now. So the point is that when we make mistakes in our life, I continue to make them all the time, we can only act on the information that we have in the moment. This is where empathy comes in, and this is where we have to understand. Now, here's where it gets sticky, and there's a slippery slope. I'm not saying that we can let people off the hook for bad behavior, murder, all these other things. That's not what I'm saying. There's a line that has to be drawn there. But what I am saying is that we have to take responsibility for ourselves and be kind human beings and understand that the mistakes that we make are only because we haven't learned yet. And hopefully we learn from our mistakes. We haven't learned yet that that's not the right way to behave, and that's not how we grow and evolve. So you're right. We have to give ourselves the grace. And I never did that. I've always, in the past, I'm changed now after I died and went through this whole experience. But I was always very, very, very hard on myself. And my mother always called me a recovering perfectionist. She was right. So we all struggle with wanting to be perfect and blaming others for our life path. So you're right. Yeah.
And that sounds so familiar, wanting everything to be perfect. I will say that I've been definitely somebody who has struggled with wanting to be in control, always looking to control everything around me, freaking out when there were things I couldn't control, and wanting everything to be perfect. So I had such high standards for myself, for everybody around me. And it's only recently that I learned, luckily not through a health crisis, but only recently I learned, if it's God's will, it will be. So I have to show up, I have to do the work. It doesn't just mean I'm sitting on the couch and waiting for everything to come to me. But if it's God's will, I will do the work and it will come. And if it's not coming, it was not meant for me, and that's okay. I don't need to know why, but I do know that I'm better off without it.
Sabrina, you get it. That's it in a nutshell. And that is a very succinct way of explaining it, but most people, it's difficult for them to grasp that. And it takes a while. And like me, it took 56 years for me to learn that lesson. So we have to be patient with others so they can learn that lesson. And again, that's why I chose to put myself out there, write the book, and try to help others with it.
Absolutely. So moving on to your relationship with your daughter, this is central to your second near-death experience, or actually your first near-death experience, because the first one you were flatlining. Tell me a bit about the experience, and then also I would like to know, how did that influence the relationship that you have with your daughter and the understanding that you have of her?
In my second near-death experience, when I was taken up and I became one with everything, and I was in this place where I did not see God, I did not see the Creator, but it was placed upon my spirit, standing there in the middle of nowhere, as clear as you and I are talking to one another. It began to come to me. And in that place, communication was telepathic and synchronistic at the same time. To know the answer to any question, all I had to do was think about it. And standing there in the middle of nowhere, I began to hear, this is the foundation for everything. My power is omnipotent. I am the creator of all. This is your real identity. And there was a lot of things that happened between then and what I'm going to tell you next. But in that moment, I understood that I was not my race, my religion, or my body. I was one with everything, connected to the vast wisdom of the universe, all of it without words. And then I saw and became part of this gigantic web of twinkling lights. And let me explain to you the best I can what this web looked like. It looked like, and we remember from science class what a neuron looks like. It has a nucleus and it has tentacles and dendrites, and they, just like in our brain, and they connect together. And this tapestry of twinkling lights I saw was woven together, and it just seemed to stretch into infinity and just hang on the ceiling of the universe. I noticed that inside each nucleus, there was a spark or a quark of light. And it was shown to me that each quark of light represented a life, and that quarks are the smallest building blocks of matter, which are made of light. In essence, we're made of light. And these quarks, they combine to create infinite possibilities in the universe. They can become a tree, a dog, a person, or a planet. And it was shown to me that light is what God uses to create, heal, and transform us, and that we're all one. We're all connected. When I was part of this web, I realized, being connected to everything and to everyone, that if I hurt myself, I hurt everything connected to me. But if I loved, the light would spread. And it was then that I realized what this web really represents. It represents the light and dark struggle that all of humanity has been going through since the beginning of time. And it's this web that what we do here, what we were talking about, our actions, are a reflection of what's going on in the spiritual realm. So it's like a mirror. This is where purpose and all of these things come together. So if we hurt ourselves, we hurt everyone and everything connected to us. But if we love, the light will spread. So it's a message of unity and oneness. We have to understand that we're all connected. We all come from the same place. We're all made of the same stuff. We just manifest differently in different physical forms. It was there, connected to everything, that my daughter Maria, my beautiful daughter, came out of nowhere. And there she was, standing there, perfect and whole. In this temporal world, this physical world, my daughter can't walk, talk, or feed herself. But there in the web, coming out of that web, she was perfect and whole. And she had this light emanating through her eyes, not the kind of light that you and I see here in the temporal world, but that spiritual light, that quark, that spiritual light that animates all life. And she's standing there, and for the first time in 20 years, we had a conversation. And I asked her, I said, Maria, I said, I've never heard your voice. I've never heard you say, I love you, Daddy. I said, your mother and I have given up everything. We've taken you everywhere to try to find a cure, to ease your suffering. And I said, just tell me what it is that we can do for you. And she said 3 words that transformed my life. She said, just love me. And when she said, just love me, it was then that I cried out into that infinite space. I never want to leave this place. And that's when I found myself back in my hospital bed. When that experience had ended, it was shortly after that my transplant team, they had taken me off the transplant list because they found a health condition in me that disqualified me for transplant. So I'll leave that for the readers to discover for themselves. But when I came out of that near-death experience and found myself back in my hospital bed, I had realized that I had seen the true essence of my daughter. I mean, here, everyone sees her as this severely handicapped, crippled child, but I know now that she's perfect and whole in spirit. She's a real person with dreams and a purpose, with laughter, with all of the things that we have in us, no different. She just can't express them. And that was an enormous paradigm shift in how I view my daughter, how I view the human race, and how I deal with people now, because it taught me to be almost an empath, so empathetic and understanding about other people and who we are as human beings, trying to get through each day, but understanding that our real identity comes from this love and light out of that web, out of that beautiful place of, some people call it heaven. I don't know where I was. I was in an in-between place. I didn't get to see the creator. I was just in that the veil was pulled back for who knows how long it lasted, a millisecond, to give me an understanding really of who we are and who my daughter really is. So that's changed my whole life. It transformed my whole life.
And I can imagine it also changed the life of your wife and how she got to know your daughter and your relationship.
Yeah, sure. Oh, yeah.
It's absolutely amazing that you had this, I don't want to call it closure, but that you had this moment where you could connect with her and understand deeply why is it that you're going through this.
Right. Yeah.
Because we're on the topic of your daughter, in the book you mention an incident where somebody was disrespectful towards your family and because of your daughter.
Yeah.
What I want to ask is, I know that in society, often enough, when somebody is outside of the norm of what we consider to be the norm,
Yeah.
often enough, we don't know how to behave and we don't know what to say. We don't know how to show support. So what usually ends up happening is we don't say anything, we don't act, we don't look. So as you've gone through this experience with your daughter, I wanted to ask you, how can people best show kindness, support, and empathy towards a person like your daughter?
It's a good question. I think that the first thing that we have to understand when we see someone like that is that we have to change our perspective and put ourselves in that person's shoes and think, is that person acting that way because they want to or because they can't help it? So we have to raise our level of empathy and consciousness about these things and understand that no one chooses to be that way. And you know, I've had people be very rude to Maria, like that incident on the plane, which was very difficult for me to swallow. But I've also had people, strangers, show an enormous amount of kindness. I've had people come up to me in airports, give me a cross for my daughter, give me a little medal with an angel. Hey, can I help you change a diaper? Is there anything that I can do for you? And I think that, you know, as human beings, we can sense when somebody needs help with something. You know, a woman getting off the subway and struggling to get the stroller out of the door. I mean, a simple act of, you know, holding the door open for her or asking her if there's anything we can do. That's all it takes. That's all anybody wants, is to know that they're not invisible and they're seen as a human being, as a real person, just trying to get through the day. And a simple act of kindness, Sabrina, can change everything. Instead of just standing there and staring and not doing anything about it, we should just ask the question, is there anything I can help you with?
So simple. And I hope that this gives everybody the tools to be a bit more present and kinder to the people around us. So I had an interview, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks back, and it was of somebody that is a suicide survivor. So her husband had taken his life. And the thing she told me that I could not have seen coming was that people stayed away, that people did not want to talk to her, to engage with her, mostly because they didn't know how to act. But what she just needed was somebody to show up, in her words, show up and shut up. Don't say you understand it. Don't say you know what it must feel like, because you don't. But just be there, sit there. And I think often enough we overcomplicate these things in our minds, that if we just show up and say, hey, I've never dealt with this, but how can I support you? How can I be there for you? Tell me, because I have no idea. That person will share.
You know, I got to add to that because it's so true. What really used to get my back up is when, and this comes down to our everyday actions. You know, we were talking about, take action, and you're only responsible for your own actions. But when people would walk by and see me struggling with Maria, and they just, shout out, "I'll pray for you," I don't need you to pray for me right now. I need you to help me change this diaper. So, because you're right, and what that woman said was correct. Nobody can possibly know how you feel, what you're going through, but a simple act of just showing up and saying, "Hey, can I wash the dishes for you tonight?" is enough.
It sounds to me like you're a changed person after this whole experience. And I also know that you have a new heart in you. So oftentimes what we say with heart transplants is that there will be traits that will manifest outwardly in the new person. What I want to ask, and I don't know if you know the answer to it, but I'm curious to know, do you think this change was because of your newfound spirituality and because of your near-death experiences? Or was it also because of your heart? So what brought this change in you?
Well, it's a combination of both. But the thing that changed me most profoundly was my experience with Maria in the spiritual realm. And then when I got my heart, you're correct that some of the traits do get expressed. And it took me 2 years to find out who my donor heart was. But in that 2-year period, I also started to go down this path of doing a tremendous amount of research because I wanted to understand why I was having these feelings and emotions that weren't my own. I've always been very in touch with my feelings, emotions, my likes, my dislikes. And all of a sudden, I'm liking food that I didn't like before. I'm having feelings and emotions that aren't my own. I'm having cravings that changes in music, all of these things that are going on. So what I found in my research, and I talk about this a lot in the book, is that the heart has a brain. And it's only been recently discovered in the past decade that the human heart has a brain. And the heart communicates with the brain in 4 ways. It communicates neurologically, it communicates biophysically through hormones, it communicates through pulse waves, which is our fight or flight, sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. And the most fascinating part is it communicates through an electromagnetic field. And this electromagnetic field, it resonates from the center of the heart and can now be measured by magnometers. And it goes out from the heart center. And it's almost like an aura. It is an aura that can be seen by special equipment that sometimes can go out more than 100 feet around us. So when we are at a party or something, or somebody walks into the room and we say, "Oh, I can feel that person's energy, good or bad," it's coming from the heart. That is where our intuition comes from. So whatever it is that you're thinking and feeling is being expressed through this electromagnetic field. And this is another way that we are connected. This is what binds us together as the human race. This electromagnetic field, it binds us together. So it's just what I saw in the spiritual realm, how we're all connected by the web. Here, we're all connected by this electromagnetic field being generated by the heart. So when I discovered all these things, I began to understand that that's why it's so important that we're very vigilant about what we allow to see, to hear, all of these things, because they affect our heart. And that affects our electromagnetic field that also affects other people around us and how it connects or disconnects us from the rest of society. So incredibly fascinating stuff about the heart. So, To answer your question again, it's been a blend of both. First, Maria, and then researching and learning about how the heart communicates with the brain and the body. Incredible, incredible stuff. There's so much for us to learn, and all of these things continue to be discovered with new technology and new things about who we are and the earth and space and all of this stuff. And it's a great time to be alive and to recognize these things. But it's also proof that we're all one, we're all connected. So what in the heck are we fighting about? This is what my message is. When we realize that we're all connected, that we're all one, that is when we'll find peace within ourselves and peace within our world. That's the truth. And only the truth can heal the world. And through truth, we find peace. And with peace, we find justice. And that's what I have to say about it.
That's a wonderful message. And it also puts in perspective that everything we need, we already have within. So
Absolutely.
you will not find love outside of yourself. You will not find peace outside of yourself. You have to build it within yourself first, and
Yes.
then it will manifest outwardly as well.
Yes, that quark, that spark of light that comes from the divine is the secret to life. And we don't have to look outside ourselves to find it. We already have it. It's within us. We're all given it for free. It just depends on what we want to do with it. And that's where free will comes in.
Rob, how can people find you? We've been talking about your book, but can you tell us what's the name of your book, where people can find it, and where can they contact you?
Yes. So the book is called Quarks of Light, a near-death experience. You can go to my website, which is Rob A. Gentile, Gentile, Rob A. Gentile. You can buy the book on Amazon. I think I have a copy here to show you the cover. There it is there. So that's the best way to get a hold of me, through my website, robagentile.com.